Hi guys, thanks for listening to my presentation on international trade and Trump's tariffs leading to a potential trade war. In this case, international trade is between the US and China. Right now, between the two countries, trade is going through a few conflicts which have to do with tariffs. Tariffs are an official list or table showing the duties or customs imposed by government on imports or exports. And to better understand why Trump is placing these tariffs on China, we first need to look at the reasons that lead to this situation. So back in August, U.S. Trade Representative launched an investigation into Chinese theft of U.S. intellectual property. The U.S. focused on 4 allegations by American companies against China, one of which was the Chinese companies were using government funds to steal American tech secrets and innovation. The Trump administration found evidence that this accusation was true, and so Trump invoked a rarely used 1974 trade law to justify this case. IP theft still remains rampant in China, with the country's world largest source of global IP theft. And this costs the U.S. economy at least $50 billion in losses annually. And because of this, Trump then announced that there would be tariffs placed on steel, aluminum, and other Chinese goods to get back at them and to take care of the U.S. So there are several elements of international trade that are involved in this event between China and the U.S., one of which is mercantilism. This is the belief that each state must protect its own interests at the expense of others. Trump shows mercantilism because he is trying to protect the United States' interests rather than caring about the other countries and what they think. And this is influencing international trade between the US and China because it's putting pressure on China to either retaliate or fix what it's done to the US. You can tell Trump doesn't care because he's putting tariffs on 50 billion in Chinese goods, and he said he will continue to place tariffs until China stops stealing from the US. Another element of trade between China and the US is the element of protectionism. This is the theory or practice of shielding a country's domestic industry from foreign competition by taxing imports. There's a few methods, one of which is tariffs, putting tariffs or duties. And an example of this was Trump putting tariffs on steel and aluminum. So at the start of March, before his latest move against China, Trump announced a 25% tariff on all steel imports and 10% on aluminum. The Trump administration claimed the U.S. relied too much on other countries for its metals, and that it could make enough weapons or vehicles using its own industry if a war broke out. So in theory, taxing foreign steel and aluminum will mean the U.S. companies will buy local steel instead, and this is making us think that it'll boost the U.S. steel and aluminum industries as more companies will want to buy their goods. Steel and aluminum prices will go up in the U.S. because there will be less of these goods coming from abroad. So the greater demand for local steel will push up the prices, lifting profits for steel makers. Through protectionism, Trump believes he can lower the trade deficit as well. A trade deficit is a term meaning the differences between how much your country buys from another country compared with how much you sell to that country. And the United States has a massive trade deficit with China. Last year it stood about 375 billion, and he wants to cut back this trade deficit, and he intends to do it using tariffs. So with all of this, it could lead to a trade war. A trade war is a side effect of protectionism, and this is where one country raises tariffs on another country, and that country retaliates and raises taxes on them as well. And this is what China and the US have begun to do. When Trump had announced a 25% tariff on Chinese imports, China retaliated by raising import duties on 34 billion worth of American goods, and this includes soybeans, electric cars, and whiskey. So Trump also slapped tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, and because of this, China's response is to safeguard the interests of the country and its people. So here we go with China also fighting back with mercantilism and protectionism as well. Another element of trade is how these political interactions interfere with markets. President Trump admitted that the trade actions he has announced against China could cause some pain in the markets. Trump quoted, "I'm not saying there won't be a little pain, but the market has gone up 40%, 42%, so we might lose a little bit of it. But we're going to have a much stronger country when we are finished." A few markets that will be hit are consumer products, such as apparel, toys, and other consumer goods. The US toy industry could be hit hard as most toys are manufactured in China. And US retailers could also see a margin pressure as they receive a lot of goods from China and will try to pass the costs onto their consumers. So this was my presentation on international trade and the tariffs that Trump placed on China.